You have come here with a question that has burned in the soul of many who have carried the burden of sensitivity, a question that haunts the heart of the one who gives yet receives no gratitude, who heals yet feels despised, who lifts another only to find themselves rejected. Why is it that the empath who extends a hand in help often feels the sting of hatred from those they've only sought to heal? It seems paradoxical at first, almost cruel, as if the universe itself turns its back on the giver. Yet, when we look beneath the surface with the lens of depth psychology, we find that this mystery is woven into the very architecture of the human psyche, into the primordial drama of shadow and light, into the archetypal conflict that has always played out between the conscious and the unconscious. Let us not imagine that the hatred directed towards the empath is a simple matter of misunderstanding or ingratitude. No, it emerges from a much deeper root, a subterranean source in the unconscious. When you, as an empath, extend your energy to heal another, you are not merely offering kindness, you are, in truth, touching the invisible wounds that the other has hidden, sometimes even from themselves, and in doing so, you bring them face to face with the contents of their shadow. The shadow is not a poetic metaphor, it is a psychic reality, a repository of everything the conscious ego has rejected, denied, or repressed. It is composed of unlived desires, buried traumas, disowned aggressions, and the primitive instincts that civilization has pressed down. To encounter one's shadow is to be unsettled, to feel the tremors of one's own denied truth. The empath, by their very nature, acts as a mirror. This mirror is not the flattering kind that shows the mask, the persona, the socially acceptable self. Instead, it reflects back the unacknowledged darkness. When you stand before someone in pain and offer your energy, they sense, often unconsciously, that you see more of them than they wish revealed. They sense, perhaps in a terrifying way, that their mask cannot withstand your gaze, and rather than thank you, they may hate you, for you have become the unwelcome reminder of what they have long buried. Consider the archetype of the wounded healer. In myth, it is often the shaman, the prophet, or the mystic who bears the gift of sight, but also the burden of rejection, Christ himself, in the archetypal dimension, is not merely loved. He is despised, mocked, crucified. Why? Because he embodies truth. And truth is intolerable to those who have lived in the comfort of self-deception. Likewise, the empath carries within them an archetypal resonance of the healer. And the healer does not only soothe wounds, they reveal them. To reveal is to unsettle. To unsettle is to provoke in the clinical room. I often saw this paradox unfold. Patients who came to analysis would sometimes, in moments of progress, turn their hostility against me, their analyst. Why? Because I had guided them too close to the abyss of their own shadow. And rather than embrace it, they projected their rage outward. It was not I who was hated, but what I had awakened within them. The empath in daily life suffers this same fate. Only without the safety of the analytic container, you offer kindness, and yet you stir the unconscious defenses of those around you. Now, you may ask, why is this particularly true for empaths? Why is the empath such a lightning rod for hatred? Even when they only intend good, it is because the empath does not merely act with external gestures. They vibrate with an interior resonance that penetrates the psychic boundaries of others. They feel into the wounds, sometimes more deeply than the wounded themselves dare to feel. And this depth of contact dissolves the barriers that the ego has so carefully erected. Imagine the psyche as a fortress. Most people defend this fortress with walls of pride, denial, or rationalization. Yet when the empath arrives, their very presence opens the gate, and once the gate is opened, the unconscious erupts like a flood. The one who feels this eruption may then turn and hate the very person who opened the door, for it was easier to blame the intruder than to face the chaos within. It is also important to understand projection. The unconscious cannot tolerate being seen directly, so it projects its contents outward, casting them upon those nearby. The empath, by entering into a relationship with another psychic field, becomes the canvas upon which this projection is painted. Thus, the hatred that you feel directed toward you is not truly yours. It is a shadow image, a displaced hostility, a reflection of the inner war raging within the other. The tragedy is that the empath, being sensitive, often internalizes this hatred, mistaking it as their own fault, as though they had somehow failed. But in truth, it is not the empath who is hated, it is the mirror they hold. Dreams often reveal this dynamic with striking clarity. I recall a patient who dreamt of a luminous figure offering her water. In the dream, she drank, but then became enraged and smashed the vessel. When we unpacked the dream, it became clear that the figure symbolized the healing presence she both craved and resisted. The water was life-giving, but it also awakened thirsts. She had long denied. To accept the gift meant admitting her emptiness, her dependency. The rage then was a defense against vulnerability. The empath in waking life often plays the role of that luminous figure, offering water only to be met with violence. This is not accidental. It is archetypal, for the psyche is structured in such a way that every light awakens its corresponding shadow. Every healer awakens resistance. Every act of love evokes the fear of loss. To understand this is to begin to free oneself from the personal sting of rejection. It is not you they hate. It is the force of unconscious truth that your presence evokes. But we must also recognize that the empath is not innocent of this dynamic. Often, unconsciously, the empath is drawn into helping others because they, too, are in search of healing. They see in others the wounds they have not fully integrated within themselves. In this sense, the empath's gift can also be their own shadow in disguise. To heal others may be a way of avoiding their own suffering. Thus, when hatred comes, it cuts doubly deep. It not only wounds the empath externally, but it exposes the fragility of their own inner foundation. The way forward, then, is not to abandon the gift, but to deepen the understanding of it. The empath must learn that to heal does not mean to save, that to love does not mean to be loved in return, and that the hatred they encounter is not a verdict upon their worth, but a symptom of the archetypal drama unfolding. When you hold a mirror, some will look and be grateful, others will smash it to pieces, but the mirror remains true. If you have felt this hatred, know that it is not evidence of your failure. Rather, it is a sign that your presence carries power. Power is always double-edged. It heals, but it also provokes. To walk as an empath is to walk as one who embodies both balm and fire. You are the comforter, but also the awakener, and awakening is rarely welcomed. When we look at this through the lens of alchemy, we find yet another image. The alchemists spoke of the nigredo, the blackening, the stage of decay and putrefaction that precedes transformation. The empath often catalyzes this stage in others. To be hated is to have drawn someone into their nigredo, to have unsettled their stable but stagnant existence. Out of this darkness, a transformation may arise, but in the moment, the one who enters the nigredo often blames the one who initiated it. Thus, you are displeased, not because you have harmed, but because you have set the alchemical fire. This, my friends, is why empaths so often feel the paradox of being hated by those they have helped. It is the law of the psyche, the eternal dance of shadow and light. To carry this knowledge is to suffer less personally and to embrace more fully the archetypal dimension of your calling. You are not merely you. You are an image, an instrument, a vessel through which the unconscious stirs. And though you may suffer rejection, your role is necessary in the drama of transformation. If we are to travel further into this paradox, we must also speak of the archetypal figure of the scapegoat. For this is often the role unconsciously assigned to the empath. In ancient rituals, the scapegoat carried the sins, the darkness, the collective shame of the community, and was driven out into the wilderness. This was not merely a cultural practice, but a psychic necessity, for the human psyche cannot bear to hold the full weight of its shadow without finding an external vessel onto which it can be cast. And who is more suited to receive this projection than the one who has already revealed an openness to carry the pain of others? Thus, the empath becomes the unwilling scapegoat, carrying not only their own wounds, but the disowned fragments of those they encounter. To be scapegoated is to feel unjustly accused, to be burdened with guilt that is not yours, to feel hatred from those you have only sought to relieve. Yet this phenomenon must be understood as an archetypal process. It is not random, nor is it solely personal. It is the old drama, repeating itself in modern guise, enacted in relationships, families, workplaces, and friendships. The empath becomes the sacrificial vessel through which others attempt to purify themselves of the darkness they cannot bear to integrate. What then is to be done? Shall the empath refuse this role, harden their heart, close their gift, and retreat into the safety of indifference? Some do, some having been burned too many times by the fire of projection, withdraw their light and cease to offer it. But in doing so, they deny a fundamental aspect of their soul. Others continue to give without awareness, endlessly absorbing hatred until they are crushed under the weight of what is not theirs. Neither path is sufficient. The task of individuation requires a third way, to continue to carry the gift, but with consciousness, with boundaries, with the knowledge that what is projected upon you does not belong to you. This requires a spiritual maturity, a psychological depth, a capacity to distinguish between your essence and the images cast upon you. Without this discernment, the empath remains vulnerable to confusion, internalizing the hostility of others as if it were a verdict upon their very being. With discernment, however, the empath can stand like the tree that endures the storm, rooted, grounded, unmoved by the winds of projection. The leaves may be torn, the branches shaken, but the essence remains. But let us look more deeply into why those who are helped can respond with hatred. One dimension is envy. To be helped is to acknowledge need. To acknowledge need is to feel small, and the ego, which thrives on the illusion of self-sufficiency, resents this. The empath, by offering help, may inadvertently wound the pride of the other. They feel in the depths of their soul exposed as incomplete, as vulnerable, as one who cannot exist without another's aid. And rather than feel gratitude, they may mask this vulnerability with aggression. They hate not because they were harmed, but because they were made aware of their fragility. There's also the archetype of the betrayer. Think of Judas, who followed the healer, who received the bread and the teaching, yet who betrayed with a kiss. Why? Because to walk in the presence of light is to feel the unbearable contrast with one's own darkness. It is easier to destroy the light than to allow it to reveal the hidden shadows. This archetype repeats itself endlessly in human relationships. The empath gives, but the one who receives may betray, may lash out, may reject, not because the gift was false, but because the gift was too true. In dreams, this manifests as the image of the benevolent figure turning suddenly into the enemy. The dreamer who sought comfort finds terror in the very one who offered it. This duality is not accidental. It reveals the ambivalence of the unconscious toward healing. We long for wholeness, yet we resist the dissolution of our defenses. We crave love, yet we fear its exposure of our emptiness. The empath, embodying love, becomes both desired and despised, adored and rejected, healer and enemy. I must tell you, the hatred that empaths feel from others is not always conscious. Often it is subtle, a withdrawal of affection, a coldness, a criticism that cuts deeper than expected. Yet beneath these gestures lies the same archetypal dynamic. The other senses, often without words, that you carry something dangerous. The power to unveil, and so they protect themselves with hostility to recognize this pattern. is not to excuse cruelty, but to understand it and thereby to be freed from the illusion that it is your fault. Yet, there is another dimension that must be spoken of. Though it is uncomfortable, sometimes the empath unconsciously seeks out hatred, not because they desire suffering, but because their own shadow compels them toward it. The empaths may carry within themselves a wound of rejection from childhood, a primal memory of being unloved, unseen, or misunderstood. And in adulthood, they recreate this pattern by seeking out relationships in which their gift is not honored. They help those who cannot give gratitude, as if trying to rewrite the old wound, hoping that this time it will end differently, but it rarely does. The old story repeats until it is brought into consciousness. This is why self-knowledge is indispensable. To be an empath without self-knowledge is to be tossed about on the seas of projection, endlessly wounded by others' shadows and one's own. To be an empath with self-knowledge is to become an alchemist, able to transmute hatred into understanding, rejection into insight, suffering into wisdom. The hatred of others becomes then not a curse, but a teacher, a mirror in which you see not only their shadow, but your own. The empath's journey is not merely to heal others, it is to integrate themselves, to walk into the depths of one's own shadow, to face the anger, the resentment, the desire to be needed, the fear of abandonment. This is the true path of individuation, for only when the empath has embraced their own darkness can they stand before the darkness of others without being consumed by it. Only then can they give without attachment, heal without expectation, love without demanding love in return. We might also say that the empath is called to hold the tension of opposites. On one side, the longing to give, to soothe, to carry. On the other, the inevitable hostility and rejection that this evokes. To hold this tension without collapsing into despair or bitterness is to participate in the great work of the psyche, the opus of transformation. For in the very fire of rejection, the empath is forged into a deeper authenticity, no longer bound by the need for approval, no longer enslaved by the desire to be seen as good. They become instead a vessel of truth, willing to be hated if that is the price of authenticity. This is not a romantic path. It is not the sentimental picture of the ever-loved healer. It is a path of fire, of crucifixion, of shadow. And yet, it is also the path through which the empath discovers their own wholeness. For in learning to endure hatred without being destroyed, in learning to carry rejection without losing love, the empath encounters the archetype of the self, the center of the psyche, the image of wholeness that transcends all opposites. Thus, what appears as hatred from others becomes paradoxically the doorway into individuation. The empath, if conscious, can take this hatred and say, this is not my enemy, this is my teacher. This is the mirror in which I see the drama of the psyche enacted, and in this seeing I am freed. We now descend further into the underworld of this mystery. For to understand why the empath receives hatred in exchange for love, we must speak not only of shadow and projection, but of the deeper archetypal currents that govern human relationships. The psyche is not a simple surface upon which interactions occur. It is a vast, living field of forces populated by archetypes that act as eternal patterns, shaping every encounter, every love, every betrayal. When the empath extends their gift, they are not merely engaging with an individual, they are stepping into an archetypal drama, one that has been enacted since the beginning of human consciousness. Consider the archetype of the victim and the rescuer. The empath is often drawn unconsciously to the victim, to the one who suffers, who cries out silently for help. This is not accidental, it is archetypal magnetism. But within the victim lies not only pain, but also resentment. To be seen as a victim is humiliating to the ego. The one who is rescued may feel gratitude, yes, but alongside it burns a hidden rage. Rage at their dependency, rage at the mirror that reveals their weakness, rage that they were not strong enough to stand without another's aid. Thus, the rescuer awakens in the victim not only gratitude, but hostility. And the empath, who embodies the rescuer, finds themselves unexpectedly hated. This hostility is intensified when we remember that every victim carries within them a hidden tyrant. The polarity of victim and tyrant are two sides of the same archetype. When you heal the victim, you may also awaken the tyrant, the shadow force that resents your power and seeks to strike you down. This is why the empath is often blindsided. They expect the victim's gratitude, but instead they awaken the tyrant's vengeance. In my work with patients, I saw this archetype emerge repeatedly. A person would arrive in despair, pleading for help, only to turn upon me with accusation. When I brought them closer to truth, I learned to recognize that this was not personal. It was the archetypal pattern of victim and rescuer unfolding in the analytic field. If the empath can grasp this, they will suffer less. They will see that the hatred is not about them, but about the archetypal energies that swirl between souls. Another archetype that reveals itself here is that of the trickster. The trickster is the one who disrupts, who unsettles, who reveals the hidden contradictions of life. In many ways, the empath unwittingly embodies the trickster, for by offering help, they overturn the illusions of autonomy and pride that others cling to. To be helped is to admit that one is not self-sufficient. And this is a trick the ego resists. Thus, the empath, without intending it, plays the role of the trickster who unmasks the ego's lie. And the ego, humiliated, responds with hostility. We must also speak of anima and animus, those inner figures of the psyche that shape our relationships. The empath often constellates these figures in the unconscious of others. A man may project his anima upon a female empath, feeling both drawn to her sensitivity and enraged by the vulnerability she evokes within him. A woman may project her animus upon a male empath, experiencing his care as both protective and intrusive, both desired and despised. These projections are rarely conscious. They emerge as inexplicable emotions, sudden irritation, irrational hostility directed towards the empath. Yet in truth, what is hated is not the empaths themselves, but the inner figure they have awakened. Here lies the crux of the mystery. The empath becomes the stage upon which the other's unconscious drama is enacted. They become the carrier of projections, the vessel of archetypes, the mirror of shadow. And because of this, they receive not only love, but hatred. Not only gratitude, but betrayal. To live as an empath is to be caught in the cross currents of archetypal energies, far larger than the personal ego can comprehend. Now, let us turn inward, for it is not enough to analyze the other. The empaths must also confront their own unconscious. Why do they help? Why do they give endlessly, even to those who despise them? Often it is because they seek unconsciously to heal their own wound. They believe that by healing others, they will finally be worthy of love. Finally, be safe from rejection, but this is a deception, a trick of the psyche, for no amount of giving can fill the void that has not been faced within oneself. The hatred of others then becomes a brutal teacher, forcing the empaths to recognize that their worth cannot be established through sacrifice alone. In the alchemical texts, we find the image of the wounded healer as the one who carries the poison and the cure. The empath must accept this paradox within themselves. They carry love, but also the wound of being unloved. They offer healing, but they also need healing. When they deny this and attempt to heal only others, they are bound to encounter hatred, for the psyche resists being used as the unconscious vessel for another's redemption. But when the empath turns inward, when they face their own shadow, when they acknowledge their own need and integrate it, then their giving becomes pure, no longer bound by unconscious compulsion. We must also speak of boundaries. The empath often suffers because they do not recognize where they end and another begins. They merge, they absorb, they carry what is not theirs. And in doing so, they provoke unconscious hostility. For no one wishes to be unconsciously invaded, even by kindness. To help without boundaries is to enter into the psychic field of another without consent. This can feel to the unconscious like intrusion, like possession. And so hostility arises. The empath may protest, but I only meant to help. Yet the unconscious responds not to intention, but to energy. Without boundaries, the gift is felt as a violation. Thus, the empath must learn the art of separation, to love without absorbing, to help without rescuing, to mirror without becoming the mirror. This requires inner strength, the ability to hold one's own center, even in the face of another's suffering. It requires the courage to let others struggle, to let them find their own way, to accept that not all who suffer wish to be healed. This is perhaps the hardest lesson of all, that not everyone desires your gift, and that sometimes the greatest love is to step back. And yet, paradoxically, when the empath truly embodies this boundary, their presence becomes even more healing. For now, it is free of compulsion, free of intrusion, free of the unconscious demand to be loved in return. It is simply presence, simply love. Without attachment, such presence is rare, and it is the presence of the individuated soul. Still, even with boundaries, hatred may come. This is inevitable, for whenever the unconscious is stirred, resistance arises. The empath must learn not to fear this resistance, not to retreat in despair, but to see it as the necessary fire of transformation, just as the alchemist knew that the nigredo, the blackening, was necessary before the gold could be born. So too must the empath accept that hatred is often the beginning of healing, not the end. Imagine a dream. A figure offers light to a blind man. The blind man recoils, shouting, striking the light bringer, yet slowly, painfully, his eyes begin to open. This is the image of the empath's role. To be hated sometimes is to be the bearer of light. If you are an empath, you must carry this knowledge deep in your soul. Otherwise, the hatred you encounter will break you. You must know that you are walking an archetypal path, one that has always been marked by rejection. The prophets were stoned, the healers cast out, the mystics mocked. To expect otherwise is to misunderstand the nature of your calling. But if you accept it, if you embrace the paradox, you will discover a strength within you that cannot be shaken. For the empath's journey is not to be loved by all, but to embody truth. And truth, when spoken into the world, will always awaken both love and hate. If you can endure both without losing your center, you will have touched the self, that eternal image of wholeness that transcends every projection. We arrive now at the final descent, and perhaps the most difficult truth of all. The hatred directed towards the empath is not simply the result of projection or wounded pride. It is also a summons. It is the call of the unconscious, demanding that the empath themselves awaken. For to be hated unjustly is to be thrust into the fire of individuation. It forces you to confront the ultimate question: who are you? When you are no longer defined by the eyes of others? Who are you when even love given is met with scorn? This is the crucible of the empath, and it is only in this crucible that the true self is revealed. The ego longs for recognition. It wants its goodness affirmed, its sacrifices acknowledged, its love rewarded. And when this does not happen, when instead hatred and rejection come, the ego suffers. It feels betrayed, humiliated, abandoned. Yet in this very suffering lies the doorway to transformation. For the ego must die if the self is to be born. The hatred that empaths feel from those they have helped is, in this sense, an alchemical fire that burns away the need for external validation. It strips the empath bare, leaving them face to face with their own essence, with the eternal core that is not dependent on praise or blame. This stripping away is painful. It feels like loss, like death, like crucifixion, but it is also liberation. For once you have endured being hated for the very love you offered, you discover a freedom that cannot be shaken. You discover that your worth is not in the hands of others, that your gift does not require applause, that your love is not invalidated by rejection. You discover that the true measure of your being is not how others respond, but how deeply you remain rooted in the self. This is why so many mystics, prophets, and healers throughout history have walked paths marked by rejection. Their journey was not merely to heal others, but to be purified themselves, to be burned in the fire, until only the gold of the self remained. The empath, too, is called to this path. Not all will accept it, for it is a lonely road. But those who do will find that the hatred of others no longer wounds in the same way. It becomes instead a signpost, an initiation, a reminder that one is walking the archetypal path of the healer, the truth bearer, the mirror of shadow. I say to you, do not seek to avoid this hatred. Do not waste your energy trying to make all love you, for that is a futile task, and it betrays your own calling. Instead, seek to understand it, see it for what it is, a symptom of the unconscious in turmoil, a projection of shadows, a resistance to healing, a mirror of your own wounds. Accept it, not as truth about you, but as part of the eternal drama of human transformation. And yet, acceptance does not mean passivity. To be an empath with awareness is not to endlessly endure abuse or to martyr yourself in toxic relationships. It is to discern. It is to know when to give and when to withhold, when to stay and when to walk away. For sometimes the most healing act is to step back, to allow the other to face their own darkness without your intervention. This is not abandonment. It is respect for the autonomy of the other soul. To carry everyone's pain is not your task. Your task is to embody truth, to carry light, to mirror shadow. What others do with that is their choice, not your responsibility. Dreams reveal this in symbolic form. There is often the dream of carrying a heavy burden, of walking with strangers upon your back, of being crushed by weight, not your own. When the dreamer awakens, they realize, I have carried too much. The task of individuation is to set down what is not yours, to distinguish your burden from the projections of others. Only then can you walk freely. There is another dimension that must be spoken of. Hatred can also conceal admiration. Sometimes those who despise you secretly envy your gift. They hate not you, but their own inability to embody what you embody. They resent the sensitivity they have long buried within themselves. To stand in your presence is to feel the ghost of what they once were, or could have been. Their hatred is the mask worn by their unacknowledged longing. To recognize this is not to excuse cruelty, but to understand that behind hostility there is often a cry of the soul. But do not be deceived into trying to win them over. That is the trap of the wounded empath. Forever seeking to turn hatred into love. No, your task is not to transform their projection, but to remain faithful to your center. If love comes, receive it. If hatred comes, endure it. But in both, remain rooted in the self, that great archetype of wholeness, is beyond the dualities of love and hate, acceptance and rejection. To touch the self is to know that you are more than the roles others assign you. You are more than rescuer, more than scapegoat, more than mirror. You are the totality of light and shadow, the union of opposites, the living image of wholeness. To realize this is the true liberation of the empath, for then you are no longer defined by how others see you. You are no longer enslaved by the demand to be loved. You can give freely, without attachment. You can endure rejection without despair. You can walk your path alone, if necessary, but whole. And when you reach this place, you will discover something astonishing. The hatred no longer pierces you in the same way. It becomes transparent, like smoke passing through the air. You see it for what it is, a shadow play, a projection, an archetypal drama unfolding. And instead of collapsing under its weight, you stand as witness, as participant, but no longer as victim. This does not mean you will never feel pain again. You will. To be sensitive is always to be vulnerable. But the pain will no longer define you. It will no longer break you. It will become part of the larger rhythm of your life, woven into the tapestry of your individuation. You will see that even the hatred of others has been a necessary part of your journey, shaping you, purifying you, leading you to the self. So I say to you, embrace the paradox. Do not flee from the mystery that love can evoke hatred, that healing can provoke hostility. For in this paradox lies the deepest truth of the psyche, that transformation always awakens resistance. That light always casts a shadow. That wholeness is born not in the absence of conflict, but in its embrace. To be an empath is to stand in this tension, to endure the crossfire of projections, to carry both the balm and the fire. It is a heavy calling, but it is also a sacred one. And remember, you are not alone. This path has been walked by countless souls before you. The mystics, the shamans, the healers, the prophets, they too were hated by those they sought to help. They too were betrayed, mocked, crucified, but through it all, they discovered the self, the eternal core that no hatred can destroy. You walk in their footsteps, you carry the same archetypal flame, and though the world may not always thank you, though some may even despise you, the truth of your being remains. So let the hatred come, if it must. Let the rejection unfold. If it is part of the drama, stand firm. Know who you are. Do not be defined by their projections. Do not lose yourself in their shadows. Remain faithful to your own soul. For in the end, it is not the love or the hatred of others that defines you. It is your fidelity to the self, your courage to embody truth, your willingness to carry the paradox of being both healer and scapegoat, both loved and hated, both rejected and whole. This is the destiny of the empath. This is the path of individuation. And though it is not easy, though it burns, it is also the path that leads to freedom. For when you can endure being hated for the love you have given, you are free. You have transcended the chains of ego, and you have touched the eternal ground of the self,